Hello, and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. Now, my guest today is an expert on Big Talk. So, Sherer Murray is an award-winning author, journalist, and communications expert. She is a TEDx speaker and the founder of the Let Go For It brand. Now, that wasn't me misstating it. Let go for it. Not let's go for it, but let go for it. In fact, that's her mantra, letting go. She did a TEDx talk called The Unstoppable Power of Letting Go, and it had 3 million views. 3 million views, girl, 3 million views. And this breaks down her own journey of actually letting go so that she could successfully move forward. Now, she got so many comments and people reaching out to her about this TEDx, 3 million views, The Unstoppable Power of Letting Go, that she wrote a best-selling book, Big Wild Love, The Unstoppable Power of Letting Go. It was released in May, right in the midst of the pandemic, and we're going to talk about that today. So Jill comes from a background of improv comedy. She studied at the famous Second City in Chicago. She wrote a popular blog called Diary of a Writer in a Midlife Crisis. Oh, we're going to talk about that too.
Yes.
And she has pretty much let go of just about everything by putting her weight in Shape magazine so that she could talk about a year-long journey. She had a year-long assignment to document this weight loss. So there's a lot of things I want to cover today. But I want to start off with this question. Does having a background in comedy help you with letting go, with midlife crises, with putting your weight in shape? Like, how does the background in comedy help you to approach all of these super vulnerable things that you've done?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. Well, hi, Laura. Happy to be here. I listened to that intro, and I'm always like, God, I'm tired. I need a nap. Um, it's helpful. I mean, I think just being someone that naturally has a sense of humor is helpful. It's a way that I survive. But improv as an actual tool is helpful because it teaches you so many amazing things about how to deal with life and how to deal with sort of what's thrown your way and how to kind of look at the entirety of the situation. And so I think, having an understanding of how improv works and also having someone that has always had kind of a big personality, big sense of humor, when I find myself being really in a dark moment, I remind myself that, I'll give you an example. I used to work for an insurance company. I ran their communications department. I ran and built their communications department. And we used to do employee benefits guides and those kinds of materials. And in the throes of our busiest season, when we had like 30 clients waiting for an employee benefits guide in like 5 minutes, one of the girls on my team used to run around and say, good God, nobody ever died from not getting their benefits guide, for goodness sakes. And it's like a perfect example of when you have that predilection, you can be inside of your most stressful and darkest moments and think, oh, for goodness sakes, like, this is not the end all be all, and life changes. And then there's always, as a writer and somebody who's funny, there's always like, oh, I have to write this down because this is such great fodder and it's a great experience to come back to with that more objective. But yeah, and improv is wonderful. It just really, like, I think every child should take improv in like the 4th grade, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, because it so teaches you how to engage with the world, how to think on your feet, how to embrace perspective and other people's viewpoints, how to stay in the game, stay in the conversation, manage your emotions, be part of a big team. I mean, there's just so many great things about it. I love doing improv. So, yeah.
I also think that it teaches you that failure is not finale. I had Mike Ganino on the show in the last season, and he, his background in improv, he teaches improv on, to corporations and communications teams. And I told him the story. The first time I met him was at a training conference for speakers, and you had to go to all the sessions. I never go to sessions ever when I'm at a conference. I'm either like on stage or I'm hanging out in the hallway talking to people, but I never like actually sit in breakout rooms. But you had to go, it was like required. You had to go to the sessions. And one of the sessions was improv. And I walked into this room and there were like 200 people in the room. And I was like, awesome, I can just hide in the back. So I like got the chair like way in the back in the far corner so nobody could see me. And then he was like, okay, everybody come down to the stage and get in a big circle. And I was like, shoot, like there's nowhere to hide. And then he made us do things like cluck like a chicken and bark like a dog and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But then it actually grew into having conversations and doing little improv bits. And the next time I got on stage, I was suddenly not afraid anymore because I was like, what's the worst that happens? I'll just yes and myself. I'll just move to the next thing. It's gonna be fine. And I told him that story later because it was the very first time I ever met him. I'm like, I walked into that room and I hated it and I hated you and I hated everything about it. And I didn't even love you till when I was done. I was just couldn't get out of there fast enough. And then the next time I got off stage, I was like, that Mike Ganino guy, man, I love him. We became very good friends, but it was transformational.
Yes. You know, it's so funny that you say that because at Second City, they have like year-long programs. So, you know, improv is all about the ensemble. So the first day for the first session, everybody's all nervous, you know, and then we get into our ensembles and we do our thing and we travel on down. And I remember being like in the third session of our group, we'd already gone through all the beginning parts that you're talking about. And we'd see at registration, like the newbies kind of coming in and starting their first round. And we'd be like, look at them. They're all so polite and, you know, being so like, hi. They're like, they have no idea that in like 30 minutes, they're going to be hopping on one leg and like smacking each other in the butt and doing all kinds of things that will absolutely mortify them. And then they'll be great. Then they're just going to be like so free because they've already done like the most embarrassing thing that there's nothing left to lose, you know. And you know, the other thing about improv is that it all kind of builds to the idea that everything really is just all about relationships, because that is the whole idea, is being authentic, being in the moment, having an honest exchange with whoever you happen to be in a scene with, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable that way, to be vulnerable in the sense that, you know, you can come out and just speak freely. I mean, that's one of the things that I love so much about this moment in time that I'm seeing as we move, you know, into so many different iterations of social media and the way that we're connecting, is that I think there's a higher value to authenticity. It's one of the things that I loved about doing this with you, which was, you know, we're not going to talk about small talk. We're going to actually have a conversation. And I think, you know, those are the things that connect us. Those are the things that allow us to extract a certain level of joy and fulfillment from an experience, even if we're hopping on 12 legs and, you know, we're sweating and we don't look good and we don't come across as like this curated person that we're all doing. And so that's, you know, that's another great thing about improv, is that you do learn that you can't fail because you really have nothing to lose. You know, we're all in this bag together. And as an ensemble, that's the premise. We're all here together. You know, we're flying or failing together, but there's really not a lot to lose as long as you're in the experience, like really fully in the experience.
So before we started recording, you know, I have my guest come on 10 minutes early to do sound check with me, and you were there exactly 10 minutes early. And I think you're now my 44th interview. And I think maybe there's like a handful of other people that were there on time, and everyone else is like texting me like, I'll be right there. I'll be right there. And we talked about how we both grew up in homes where if you weren't 5 minutes early, you were 5 minutes late. So you, like me, are a bit of a control freak. And yet I've always hated the idea of improv because I felt like I'm not in control. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what might happen. So how did you, if you are somebody who has that control tendency, as I do, and I don't think of that as a bug, I think of that as a feature. So let me just be clear.
Right.
How did you come to find yourself at Second City in the first place?
Well, I have to tell you, you know, control, like the whole thought of perfectionism, having to be a perfection, which I say, you know, we all have a 100% failure rate at. I loved it. I loved it. I found
Did you
it
do like on one day and you were like, I'm going to study improv? Or like, how did you like, I don't even know how
so
that like would even enter your mind. I was just like, anytime anyone was even like, let's go see an improv show, I was like, no fucking way. So like
right.
to
And don't sit in the
wake up
front
one day and
row,
want to be on
right?
the stage.
Right. You know, I don't even remember. I did it so long ago. I think my a friend of mine and my boyfriend at the time, we saw it, and I'm a person who like sees something, and even though it has absolutely nothing to do with anything that I'm doing in the moment, and we can talk about the kind of the trajectory to my TEDx talk was that here I am running this communications practice, and I see a workshop for Michael and Amy Port in New York City for, you know, life coaches and speakers, of which I was neither. And I was like, I'm going to that. So I think I've always had that spirit, if like it tugs at me. And improv was always something that was really compelling to me as a writer, because I consider myself to be truly a writer at heart. And so I thought, I'll just go and learn like all the writing, even though they had a separate track for that. That wasn't the track I selected, which is so interesting to me. But I was doing it with some friends. We thought it would be really fun. And so I don't think I fully understood what I was getting into, which serves me every day of every day of my life. It's like
Ignorance is bliss, it turns out.
it is, and I actually write this in my book when I talk about epiphanies, which incredibly fascinate me. How, you know, if we knew what would happen on the other side of an epiphany that we actually took action on, we might not take action on it. We might keep sleepwalking through it. But I don't think I fully understood that I would have to go in there in a room full of strangers and, you know, get on my head, or, you know, cluck like a chicken, or, you know, whatever it was. But that served me in that I was able to, well, I'm in it now. And if I'm in it, I'm a Capricorn, I'm a type A, I'm an overachieving, not always a good thing. Like if I'm gonna do this, man, I'm gonna give it all. And I did it. I can't honestly say I was good or bad at improv. I mean, there were people in our ensemble who were phenomenal. That was their place to be. And I can't say that I was one of them, but I loved it. And it was a way for me to crack open a little bit and come out of that controlling need to be in that space. Like, you know what, Jill, if you get up there and, you know, do something ridiculous, it's okay. And if you get up there and do something ridiculous and people judge you for it, well, that's okay too. That's on them. That's not you. That was another great way to learn that. That not everybody's going to like what you do. Not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to think you're the greatest. Not everybody's going to approve or, you know, think what you're doing is whatever. And that's okay too, because it's not about them. It's really about you.
Yeah, and I think I think that's an excellent thing to bring us to the next thing I want to talk about, which is this idea that it's okay, right? It's okay. Not everyone's going to like you, and that's okay.
Totally.
It's so one day you decided, you know what? I want to tell the entire universe what I weigh, and then chronicle a year-long weight loss, which may be successful and may not be successful in a national magazine.
Yeah. Isn't that
So
insane?
let's talk a little bit about, were you just like, I want the exposure. I want to be a writer on a bigger stage. I want to do this. Or were you like, you know what? I want to just face my demons. I mean, like, where does that come from?
First of all, I really wanted that gig. And interestingly, and
Did you know that the gig was going to come with you having to tell people what you weighed before you wanted the gig of writing for Shape, or was it okay?
yes, I did. And for people who know me and all of my myriad of body image and weight issues, which I talk about very freely, it was shocking to them. And it was a little shocking to me. I don't know if you can see a theme here, but like, it was a little shocking to me because I was so interested and I was terrified. Don't get me wrong. The idea of it was so terrifying to me, but I also saw a huge opportunity for healing. And I don't say that in a Pollyanna way. I felt like if I could aside from the whole Shape magazine, I could write columns every month, what a writer's dream, about something that is so near and dear to me. And, isn't about, whatever I was writing about American Hospital. I was a journalist for healthcare publications, but I was writing about like hospital systems. I wasn't writing about, the circumference of my butt. Okay. But I thought this would be such an opportunity to, and that gig actually coincided with the Improv. So at the time I was doing the Improv, I was writing the Shape magazine. And I looking back on it now, I can see how they kind of fed into each other. But what I loved about the opportunity was that it came to me through someone I respected and admired. And I surprised myself at how well I took her coming to me to write a column about losing weight, and how I didn't let that melt me down. Like, oh my God, you think I'm fat? I should write a column about losing weight, right? And then I thought, this is like, I worked for Gatorade. You learn marketing from Gatorade. You learn how to lose weight from Shape magazine. Like, this is an opportunity. And they were, we'll give you 1 hour a month with the body image psychologist, which was gold. We'll give you, 2 hours a month with a trainer, because we want you to be like a normal person, not someone who has a trainer every day who's working you out. We'll give you like reasonable resources. And I also saw it as an opportunity to get really healthy, because, when you have to lose weight for 6 million people in a magazine and put your weight in a magazine, like, it's a lot easier to resist the fries and the pizza. So I sort of, I said, just do it. When they offered me the job, I was like, you know what, Jill, what's the worst that can happen? People know how much you weigh. So what? And that was pretty big. And, it was also very challenging to my parent, my mother, who was very, critical and very interested in my body and very, hard on me. And I think in some weird way, it was a way to get her approval. Like, look, here's what I'm doing. Look, I'm taking care of it. And so there was a part of that, I think, that was probably motivating me. Although I don't know it was as deep as I think back on it now. I really do think it was really one of the first things I did that was really truly about my own like growth and healing, so that I could move forward and start making better choices holistically in my life.
So I have about a million questions about this. But let me start with the last part that you talked about your mom.
Yeah.
So I had eating disorders all through college, body image issues, all of that stuff. I would be lying if I said I probably still didn't have some semblance of body, dysmorphia. I think a lot of us do, especially a lot of us who, grew up in the 70s and 80s. Because, we grew up with like, the super skinny supermodels, like J-Lo didn't exist, right?
That's
like,
right.
I mean, she's our age, so she did exist, but, she wasn't, those kinds of body types were not praised, right? Curvy body types were not praised. It was like, how skinny can you possibly be? And so I think a lot of us grew up with those body image. And I think that our mothers grew up in the 50s, where they were also, given a lot of the, like, usually, like my mom went to her obstetrician when she was pregnant with me and pregnant with my sister. And the man was like, well, you've gained 12 pounds, fat ass. Like, come on, like, what's going on? Right. Like, it's that kind of thing. And so I think that there was a lot of baggage that went from their parents to them and them to us.
Absolutely.
So when you were writing, did you have to explore some of those issues that maybe your mom purposefully or consciously or subconsciously might have handed to you? And how did you handle addressing some of those demons, knowing that she'd be reading the article?
Well, I did know that. And I actually did a column with her where she came out. I was in Chicago at the time, and I live outside of Philly, in Bucks County. She actually flew to Chicago and did a photo shoot with me. And I wrote a column about her pressure on me to be thin. That was the most read column of all 12. And it was
I would imagine
that I got most email. And I got a lot of people read that column, and I got a lot of notes and emails and letters from people. But that column was incredibly, I don't want to say successful, but popular. And, it's really interesting that you asked that question, Laura, because I write a lot about my body image stuff in my book now. And as I was doing that, I was terrified because I have a chapter where I open and I talk about my mom and the pressure that she put on me to be thin. And I get, it's not like a lot, it's not mean, but it's, this is the truth. My mother behaved a certain way when I looked good and behaved another way when I didn't, right? And so I thought, well, I was so nervous about sharing that with her, sharing the book with her, but I didn't want to not tell the story because I felt like it was really important. And so I thought, let me go back and look at my shape column because, I put this out there once. It can't be a big surprise to her. And when I went back and read the column that I wrote about her and I, it was very mild. It was very watered down. It was interesting to me to reflect back at that because it was really about, like, I very tenderly talked about her desire and love for me and wanting me to have a good life and how happy she was. Ha, 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 joke, joke, joke. I was finally going to go on a diet for the world. But I didn't talk with any, in my opinion now, with any real level of great depth about it. Certainly not like I do in my book, where I talk about, how getting up in front of a room of adults at Weight Watchers at 12 years old was, me being so proud in the moment with my mother sitting in the front row beaming, but how I had no idea the effect that would have on me going forward in terms of valuing myself in the world and how contingent that would be on what I look like and, what the scale said about me.
Right.
So it's an interesting progression. And I will tell you that I finally worked up the courage, obviously, right before my book came out, my mother was going to read it, that I actually gave her a copy of the book. And I was really surprised by her response. It was amazing. It was shocking. It surprised me. It taught me that maybe I underestimated her, to your point of we carry these traditions over and over, but she called me after she read it and she said, "So I think I owe you an apology." And I said, "Okay." And she's like, "Because I didn't know that I was doing that.
Yeah.
That's just what happened to me." And honestly, Laura, like, we had the most amazing conversation. I felt like for one of the first times in my life, I was actually talking to my mother woman to woman. And it was, the really interesting part of it was that I no longer needed to hear that. I no longer needed that, but that she, I'm still so proud of her to this day, like that she, that was her response, because I was really scared about it. But yeah, so
that's an incredible, yeah, no, I mean, that's an incredible story. And I'm so glad that you and your mother were able to have that conversation. Both of my parents are still alive. I should preface this by saying that. But I was having a conversation. I actually went to see a shrink for the first time in my life in October, because I just hadn't been sleeping in the entire pandemic, and I was like, I think I'm breaking my brain. Is there something wrong with my brain? And he was, first of all, he congratulated me for making it almost all the way to 50 without needing therapy. And I was like, should you really be congratulating me on that? I don't think you should be congratulating me on that. I'm like, I made it all the way to 50 without getting therapy. I don't know if I made it all the way without needing therapy.
Without needing it, right.
Yeah, without needing it. But and then, he prescribed some medication for me. I started sleeping. Everything is fine. But I've kept going, mostly because I feel like it's book research for me. Like, I have all these interesting questions about how people think and how we process our emotions and how we manage things. And so I just keep going to him once a month. And I'm like, I have 6 questions I need to ask you about these 6 topics. And I just want to know. And one of the things that I asked him about was, do people ever get past the stuff that their parents due to them, wittingly or unwittingly, right? Like I can look at my parents and say, okay, that's something that my father's father did to him. That's something my mother's mother did to her. Some of those things are good. Some of those things are bad. Just like I'm doing those things to my kids, I'm sure, right? Like you got to work with the pots that you got. And you know, it was really interesting because he's like, well, first of all, you have to want to get past some of those things. Second of all, you need to be able to recognize that those things exist. And I said, so how do people do it? Like, does there have to be some sort of reconciliation? And he said there does, but he said reconciliation reconciliation doesn't necessarily have to be couples therapy, which I thought was a really interesting thing. So you were able to have this conversation with your mom and you had sort of the couples therapy through this. But, you know, if there are people who are listening, I just want to, I prefaced it by saying that my parents are alive because I feel like otherwise it sounds like, you know, they're gone and I can't reconcile things. But I've had conversations with my parents where it's like, oh, okay, now that's no longer a capital T thing anymore. And we can release it. But it's, you know, I think we don't even realize that we're doing it necessarily because it's, you know, the fish doesn't think like swimming in water is weird. Like that's just where they swim.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, I mean, I'm a huge believer, you know, in the spirit of maybe we're talking a little bit about like closure or the things, you know, getting that freedom from other people. And I am a huge believer that we can't wait for them. We have to find our own freedom. And because there's so many reasons. They may never come around to that. They may not have any idea or be actualized or introspective enough to understand why they do the things that they do. And so if they give it
or agree with you that it's an issue even.
Right, or agree. And, you know, so if they do, well, that's a bonus. You know, that's a bonus. Like I chalked my mother and my conversation up to having a wonderful, loving, beautiful conversation with my mother, who's a wonderful mother. She just, you know, did this thing, right? Like you said, all parents are imperfect and we get things from them. And so I think we have to find our own closure. I think we have to find our own way with whatever our parents give us. And, you know, that's kind of part of my message is, you know, sort of letting go of the things that we were given that are they're just not doing it for us. They're just not advancing us. And, you know, I wrote a whole novel about this when I was, I'm telling you all kinds of things, Laura. I wrote a novel about this when I was in my early 40s, and it was called Fat Girl in a Poncho. And it was basically the story of what do we do with all of these things that our parents give us that we don't want, and we have to find a way to live with. Now, sadly, it was in the era of chick lit, and it wasn't a chick lit book, so my agent couldn't sell it. But it was basically about a girl who was down on her luck, whose overbearing Jewish parents came to see her where she lived in a dark room, and they bought her the ugliest chandelier they could find in the store in Home Depot, and they forced her to hang it. That's at a very like nutshell way. And she hated it, but there it was this big thing, and she had to do something with it. And, you know, we get to decide what we do with that stuff and how we use it in our lives. And, you know, I have worked over so much time to work through some of those issues, you know, worked it out in public. You know, I talked about it in my shape column. And I mean, I won't come here and say, I'm cured. I'm definitely not cured. I have days where I'm like, oh no, girlfriend, go back to bed. And there are days where I'm like, you know what? It's great. It's great as part of the total picture of who you are. It's not the defining element. Yeah. And the other thing that I do, Laura, is that I don't expect myself to be done with it. Like I no longer put that pressure on myself to say, you need to move past this. I ask myself, is this getting in the way of me doing an activity or living my life in a certain way? And if the answer is no, then I feel like, okay, I'm just gonna make it a part of me. I'm gonna make it my bitch, that thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I'm gonna make it. And it rose it came up in me so big and bad for that TED Talk, as you can imagine, in front of like an audience and a live stream and 12,000 cameras and, my mother and father in the audience and, me in a dress and, wondering, oh my God, are my ex-boyfriends watching? And, whoever pulled my hair in 8th grade, like, am I going to look good? Am I going to look fat? Am I going to be unattractive? Like all those things. And I said, no, you know what? Do it anyway, because I have learned that I can't let it define me. But am I done with it? Is it ever going to be over? No, it's not. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think what happens is, I think we're so busy trying to get rid of the bad stuff that our parents or the girl in 8th grade who pulled your hair or, the ex-boyfriends gave us, that we actually forget to focus on the good stuff that they gave us too. And I mean, I am what I am because my parents are who they are, both the good and the bad. And their worst traits are magnified in me and their best traits are magnified in me. Absolutely. And I think we spend so much time blaming that we forget to actually shine a light on some of the good stuff. I mean, I had a conversation once with my mom where I was like, look, everything I am is because of you. And, you had fewer opportunities than I did because when you were growing up, women could be, nurses or teachers or wives, period. Like that was like, those were your choices. And like, I think if my mom was born 20 years later, 30 years later, she would have been running General Electric or IBM or the United States. Right. I mean, she's an incredibly capable woman. And smart and fierce and tough as nails. But it because of, how she was raised and when she was raised, it's just such a different place. So, I absolutely, it's a work in progress. I think it'll always be a work in progress because, as we grow and as we change and as they grow and as they change, and then, if you have children and, they're growing, it completely, I see myself and I'll say something to my kids and I'm like, oh my God, that was my mother. My mother just came out of my mouth. Like, how did that happen? Some of those are good things. Some of them are not good things. So let's talk about the TEDx talk. And it's funny that you say that because, I was so nervous before I gave mine that I think I lost like 10 pounds before I walked out on stage. And I was skinny when I walked out on stage. Like I was like sinewy and like I had like those like weird Madonna arms where and I still look at that and I'm like, I don't know, my ass looks kind of big. It's like, it just doesn't even matter. I could have lost 5 pounds. I could have gained 20 pounds. I would have had the same reaction. It doesn't even make a difference. But you get out there and you're like, this is vulnerable. And I didn't tell that vulnerable of a story. And it was still pretty vulnerable. Now you got out there and you told a story that was incredibly vulnerable. Like you got out there and you laid it on the table. So let's talk a little bit. That's sort of you talked about letting go, about making a decision to just walk away from the thing that you had held on to for so many years. And you went deep into that. So let's talk a little bit about how you came to want to give that talk, how you came to decide that was going to be the thing that you talked about, and how you felt leading up to those moments before you walked out on stage and just poured your heart into the audience.
Well, I mean, first of all, there were 25 speakers that day and I was like 23. So I sat there all day and I thought, okay. By the time it was time to go on stage, I was like, look, I was greasy, I was tired, I'd been through every emotion on the wheel, and I was like, all right, let's just get out there and do this. And I think again, Laura, you see a theme. I gravitate to things that excite me and terrify me. I think there's something in me that is like, you need to do this. You need to heal here. Go to this experience. Even though
there is no place I like to be more than that place where I'm like 9 toes over the edge of incompetence and just kind of peering over the edge, waiting to see if like maybe the wind will just push me over because I'm a little too scared to jump. But I know deep down, like that's where I want to be.
Right. But I also think that that there was just an inner fire to like get out there and scream to people. And so I was in my corporate job, running a communications practice, and I was obsessed with TED. I loved loved watching TED Talks. I still think it's amazing that we can see people from all over the world and learn from their immense wisdom and talent. And I was just so compelled. And I think, that there's always been, my loves are speaking and writing. And I've buried the speaking part of it for a long time. I've done a lot of speaking in corporate, but not like that. And I decided that I wanted to give a TEDx talk. And then I lost someone that I loved, and it hit me very hard. And I started looking around at my own life and other people. And I thought, we just need to let go of this shit that's just not doing it for us, because we're not going to be here forever. This person was supposed to live forever and didn't. And anything can happen anytime, which we know that logically, but I think sometimes we just kind of say, okay, and then we kind of brush our hands together and we keep moving on. Yeah. And this had me a little stopped in my tracks. So I met somebody at the Heroic Public Speaking event, Susan Sandler, who we connected, and I remember coming back and writing a note to her and saying, hey, do you want to work together? And I had no idea where that came from. It came from some deep space in my gut. And I just said, hit send, Jill, and let's see what happens. And she wound up helping me kind of figure out, what do you want to say? And so I figured out that I really wanted to talk about letting go, and how, I think that's something, it's hard for all of us, and it's hard for me too. But I'm a person who has let go a lot in my life. I've moved to 2 states, jobs or friends. I've done improv, put my weight in a national magazine. I've gotten on TED stage, with absolutely no proof of concept, right? I put myself on that stage and I told, who gets up there to talk about their monster massive dating fail, for the world. But
I think I'm going to label this episode Jump and the Net Will Appear, by the way.
Well,
that seems to be your theme.
Well, yes, because I think jump knowing that you are the net, right? That's the thing. I think there's something inside of me that tells me it will be okay. It will be okay. And I don't know if it's because all the angst growing up and feeling so unworthy, or not right, in the world of perfect bodies and perfect hair, and being this kind of different person. And I thought, what's the worst that could happen? But I tend not to think through the really dark parts of that. I stop myself and I think, what will happen if I don't pursue this? And then when you get accepted or invited to the stage, then you're sort of like, well, oh shit, now I really
oh shit.
Now I really have to do this. And
I know that oh shit moment really well, where you're just like, I'm just going to be brash and just tell the world I can do it. And then all of a sudden the world's like, great. Okay, here's the book deal. Here's the TEDx. Here's the whatever. Here's the date you have to show up. And you're like, oh shit.
Oh shit. But I think we must like it.
Yeah.
I think we like the oh shit moment.
I think maybe it's a little bit of, I feel like maybe it's a little bit of the self-hatred based on the all of the self-hatred growing up, where I deserve to be abused. So I'm going to put myself in a position where I'm going to invite the world to abuse me more. I'm not really sure. It's it's super exciting and also super terrifying at the same time. But it, imagine how boring life would be without it.
How boring. And I just never want to look back and, I remember having a conversation at my corporate job with someone and saying, well, gosh, I'd really love to write a book and give a TED talk and do some speaking. And the person saying, gosh, you're really far away from that, aren't you? Like, ooh, don't sugarcoat it. And thank you.
Yeah.
Right? And thank you. So, so I just felt like I just had something to say. I had no other agenda on that stage. I wasn't trying to hawk anything. I wasn't aiming for a book deal. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just like, this is something I really want to do. I want to have this experience. I feel like I have something worthy to say. And I got out there on that stage and I thought to myself, this is home. That's how I felt when I got on that stage. I
had that same experience. I mean, well, first I got off on that stage and I like looked at the 3 mezzanines of 2,600 people and I was like, and my sister who had flown in from Texas afterwards was like, I thought you were going to pass out. And I was like, I thought I was going to pass out too. But then I started speaking and somebody at stage left, like heard something that I said that was funny and laughed. And then somebody in the stage right heard something I said that was poignant and went, yes. And I was like, oh, I want more of that. It's the first time I'd ever been on stage in my life. And I was like, yes, yes. Right. It was like, you gave me heroin of the gods or something. I was just like, immediately I was a crackhead. Like I just like within 3 minutes.
It's true. And is there any other sign, right, from the internal and external universes of our lives telling us what we should be doing?
Yes.
Which, you know, is one reason why this past year has been so hard, you know, certainly. But I did not imagine that millions of people would watch my talk, nor did I imagine that millions or hundreds of thousands of people would write to me from countries I can't even pronounce. And honestly, I feel good every single time I hear from someone who says to me, "You've changed my life," or, and I say that it's not about me. It's none of it's the good, the bad, the ugly. It's not about me. It's just I'm reflecting back to them. That's it. And I think about if I could have, you know, pulled a phone out of my ass and watched some woman who was doing what I was absolutely terrified to do, how much that would have, you know, compelled me. And it's like, no, I didn't change your life. You changed your life. Right?
Yes. That's it. Like every time I get in a book signing line, these people come up to me, they're like, thank you for giving me permission to live the life I've always wanted. And I'm like, I never even said the word permission. You gave yourself permission. Right. But I think having somebody role model that, like you got up on that stage and you told a story about how you were clinging to this relationship because it gave you self-worth and value. And you had to let go of it and leave it, the scariest thing in the world, in order for you to find your self-worth and value, and how your life just became this incredible thing after you let go of it. And you tell the story in a way where I'm like, just ask her to marry you already, you idiot. Like I'm rooting for the guy to like pull his head out of his butt. Right. And then by the end, I'm like, yeah, girl, like screw him. You know, I mean, it's just such an incredible, it's such a, like, he doesn't know what he's missing. I mean, but you tell the story, not in a like sassy, you know, you go girl way. It was just like, it was so personal and vulnerable that I thought I was just talking to you. It was, and I've watched a lot of these talks, but it was pretty, like I can't even go watch my talk anymore because I'm like, I'm speaking like a TED talker, because it was literally the first talk I ever gave in my life. I'd never been on a stage before, but yours was just like, you were just you. And it was so raw and unvarnished and beautiful. So it's not surprising to me that hundreds of thousands of people have written to you and have told you that you have changed their life.
Thank you. I really so appreciate that. That's really lovely. I really meant it. I really felt it. And I really wanted to share it, not because I wanted to tell people, but I wanted to say, you know, look, you know, you don't have to stay where you are. And even if you think you're too old or you're too fat or you know, I've had people who said to me, your best years are behind you. You gave him your best years. And I mean, you know, like horribly, you don't have to conform to convention or let it beat you down. Like you get to decide the rules, because Laura, I wished that someone had said that to me.
Yes.
And I felt that in every fiber of my bone. And I hear from a lot of women, and I'm going to tell you what, I hear from a lot of men. And a lot of men write to me and say, oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm Hector. Oh my God. And I want to put my arms around them. I want to hug them. I want to say, you know, wow, like those notes give me chills. They give me chills. And so I'm so thrilled. And I also think, you know, when you take all of the outcome out of something, you are freer to just get out there and do it. There was no expectation. So it was just, you know, me getting up there and like basically just saying, you know, let's all just get to it. Let's all just get to it already. And I still feel all of that, even though, you know, my life is not perfect. It's not ever going to be perfect. And as someone who is constantly making these kinds of choices to dive into things that are exciting and terrifying, I think sometimes I live in the space of wonder hell. Like that's where I have like my desk and my computer and my yoga pants and my dogs, and like that's the place. And and right now it's a very weird place to be.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for raising Wonder Hell. I'm so intrigued by your story that I didn't even do my usual, like, this is what Wonder Hell's about. So I am doing these podcasts, these video interviews as a way to do book research for my next book, which is going to be called Wonder Hell. And Wonder Hell is that moment where something you've done actually has some success. You've gotten the job of your dreams. You've written the book. You've done a talk. You see momentum, and you're like, this is incredible and amazing and wonderful. And also, I've never been so tired in my entire life. I'm full of stress and anxiety and imposter syndrome, and I feel like I'm burning out and I don't even know which way is up. It's hell. It's wonderful and it's hell. And Wonder Hell, as we've discussed, is that place in your psyche where your burden of potential walks in and goes, hey, Jill, what you got for me, sweetheart? Are you going to live into this newfound potential, this thing you didn't even know was inside of you? Now that you have scaled 9 toes over the edge of incompetency to the next cliff, and you're like, oh my God, the view's even better. And now I want to go there. Oh, I want more, right? This whole thing. What do you do with it? So you have this moment, the talk goes gangbusters viral. You get hundreds of thousands of emails and notes and comments. And so you decide to write a book. And did you have like any kind of, I know you just said that you removed the attachment from outcome to it, but did you have any idea or thought of like what quote unquote success would be in that book as you were writing it? Was there any, were you like collecting all of the emails so that you could launch it, big to all these people, or did you just feel like you needed to continue the conversation? Were you able to disconnect outcome from the book?
I mean, yes and no. It's hard when you write a book to disconnect outcome. I think what I wanted to do in the book, which was not a book that I ever thought I would write. I mean,
well, it wasn't a talk you ever thought you'd give. So
exactly.
Here's the theme, right?
Right. And I mean, I have so many books in me, but this book answered all the questions that I got from people who wrote to me far and wide about the art and practice of letting go. So, from giving that one talk, I had to become now the expert on letting go. And so I had to do a lot of research and a lot of, which was fine because I'm a journalist by training and I like that. But I also had to do a lot of really deep soul searching, and I had to become my own best student. And so that came in very handy when you launch a book, as every bookstore in the world is closing.
Yes. So I want to talk about that in a moment, because the launching the book in the pandemic is like its own special kind of wonder hell, or maybe it's hell wonder. I'm not even sure. But I want to just go back to the part about having to become a student again, and having to do the research and having to become the expert on letting go. So there's this moment when you give the talk and you are an expert in your story. You know it works for you. And you are up there and you are telling your story from the heart. And then all of a sudden you become the guru for people, right? And they're like, Jill is the expert. I'm going to write to her with my question. Jill is going to tell me what to do. And suddenly you have responsibility for all the people, the hundreds of thousands of people that are reaching out to you. And you and I both know there are plenty of people in the book writing world and the stage speaking world who get up there and they are more concerned about the joke or the bit, or how they move around the stage, or the lead gen, than they are about the actual content. And I take the content very seriously, because I have people who come up to me and they'll be like, Laura, I read the first half of your book and I quit my job. And I'm like, please read the other half. Like I just I bought your book and I'm leaving my husband. And I'm like, just read the first chapter at least, they're making these massive life changes based on things that we say. And we have a responsibility to get that shit right. So you suddenly are like, you are the expert. People are sending you these emails. How do you handle the burden of that responsibility, right? Like we're talking about the burden of potential, but the burden of responsibility of making sure that either you get it right when you give them advice, or that you tell them that you don't know and you send them to resources, but in some cases you are giving them actual advice. So how did you, were you comfortable with that immediately from the start, or did you have to, is your process, you have to do a certain amount of research before you're like, okay, I understand the waterfront? Or how did you come to a place where you felt comfortable giving those answers outside of just your own life experience?
Well, it's an interesting question because what I struggled with at first, and I'm a journalist by training, so I struggled with having any opinion. Like,
Yes.
I was trained that I don't have an opinion. I'm just the collector of facts, and I'm just analyzing what's given to me.
Yes.
So I think that was really hard for me at first because I loved doing the research, and I loved learning and diving in and realizing that there's not a whole lot out there about letting go. In tangible terms, right? In tangible terms. So to your point, it was important to me to not talk in a fluffy way to people, to actually give them tangible ideas for how they could think about letting go, understand what it really meant in their own world. And so I pulled back into my own story and what worked for me and what I'd seen work for other people. And I interviewed a lot of women around their stories. And I pulled together this process, and I thought a lot about the questions that people were coming to me with. That was really the guiding light of my book. And the one thread that I saw running through every single question I got from every single person was that they were very low on self-love and self-esteem. And, I say that, I know we talk a lot about self-love these days. And, when we were growing up, nobody talked about self-love. Like, that was not a concept at all. But what I talk about really is self-love with the intention to let go. So it's with a purpose, which is why I call it big wild love, because it's self-love, because letting go is about risk. It's about taking a risk. If I let go of this thing, then is there going to be another relationship behind it? Is there going to be another job behind it? Is there going to be another friendship behind it, or a better belief or mindset, or whatever it is? When we let go, we're taking risks. And a lot of people don't have the confidence and courage in themselves to take that risk. So they stay stuck, holding on to things that aren't working for them. And to me, that was the biggest problem for myself at the time that I was stuck. If I had had more confidence in myself, probably wouldn't have stayed as long as I did, right? I don't know for sure, but it's the thread that I saw. So it was really interesting to, again, do research on that, because there are not a lot of statistics, and there's a lot of opinion, but it's not self-love holistically, but it's self-love to give you to help you do something, to help you take an action step. And I thought, this would be a really interesting and tangible thing for people. Like, if you want to do this thing, if you want to create change, if you want to move forward, stop looking outside of yourself for now. Get your house in order, figure out who you are and what you want. Because what worked for me and continues to work for me is knowing, kind of where we started in this conversation, is that, no matter what happens, I'll be okay. No matter what happens, I'll always be okay, because I have me. And I'm awesome. I know I can survive. I know I can do better than survive. I know I can have a happy life in the face of all kinds of things. And so that gives me, the bravery that I may need to say, I'm going to let go of my big old corporate job of 10 years to launch a book and go on a book tour and be a speaker and, bye-bye to the job. And then, mom gets sick, dad gets sick, and, a global pandemic. Who would have planned for any of that, right? So becoming my own best teacher is something that I also wanted to be able to do, so that I could go out into the world and say to people, look, I walk my talk. I have epiphanies all the time. Most of them I look at, some of them I don't, like everybody else. The second step is to feel and deal. I feel and deal a lot. And I spend a lot of time feeling and dealing, and it's not always pretty, the feeling and dealing. And it's not always about logic. Sometimes it's me, in the bathroom where I meditate with the fan on to escape the dogs, with a bag of, cookies and a box of tissues, thinking about, all the horrible things that have happened to me in my life and how unfair it is. And, I go to all those dark places because that's just being human. I don't try and negotiate away my humanness ever. I just give myself a lot of grace. And doing all of this work around letting go has been so fascinating. Being called to do more, be more around it, has really helped me too. So it's been an interesting journey. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering the question because I feel like
No. It's fantastic. I mean, I think this idea of understanding outcome is part of the process, but not defining your identity by it is a really interesting way to think about it, because I think that's what happens, right? I think we get to these wonder hell moments where we suddenly realize that we're made for more, and then we decide that if we don't achieve the next level and the next level and the next level, then there's something wrong with us. When in fact, if we look at it more as an exploration and not as, hurdles that we have to jump over or awards that we have to get, I think that's really useful. Another thing that this shrink said to me, which I've been turning over in my mind over and over again, is he said, Laura, you're a pretty high achiever, and we can work on that if you want. And again, I was like, that's a feature, not a bug. I don't think we need to work on that. And he's like, but there's only so long you can do that before you get burnt out, because you gotta start thinking about sort of the self-care part of it.
Right.
And he said, just so you know, you don't have to give any of the trophies back.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting concept, right? You don't give them back. You still are the person who achieved all these things. And if you define yourself by I'm only as good as the next thing I achieve, that really puts you in the cycle where there are going to be a lot of cookies and tissues in the bathroom floor.
Right. And yes, and I am feeling every lick of that. But one of the things that I am also learning is that, when you're in this space of wonder hell, there is a cracked window that lets in all kinds of new things.
Yes.
New limiting beliefs, new fears, new emotions, new, forms of self-torture in the pressure. And, I find, for me, being grounded in the year that I thought I would be flying has opened up the door to so many new limiting beliefs. And I think at a certain point, you have to, I don't want to use the word surrender because it feels very disempowering. I want to say maybe acquiesce that, life is a circle. And, we climb over one mountain and then we're in the valley. And then we have to climb up again. There's no guarantee that once we climb over the mountain and we're in the valley, that once we climb over the mountain, we just get a free leap to the next mountain. It just doesn't work that way. We have to come down off that mountain in order to get up the mountain. And so I think there's a couple of ways to approach that. You come down off the mountain and now you're in the valley and you're in circles and you feel awful. And, you're, snotty on the sofa watching Lifetime television for months and, thinking all the bad things until the day you wake up and you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to have to reclimb it. I'm going to have to reclimb it. There's no, and maybe in a global pandemic, you're not just in a valley, but somebody dug a hole and now you're all the way at the bottom of the hole. And now the mountain is even harder because now you're well, now there's 5 mountains. And you're well, now I don't even know which one to climb. I'm just going to stay down here in this hole for a while. And I think that if has to be, what I have learned is grace, self-grace. What I have learned is, listening is a superpower. And it's not just about listening to other people. It's about listening to the truth inside of us. The one that we may not have had to connect to until this moment that we're in. That tells us all the things that your therapist said, which is, I can fix that overachieving spirit And it's not about beating it down. It's about balance. And it's about learning to give ourselves grace, because I understand that in such an enormous way, Laura. I am a horrible overachiever. And I don't say that as a good thing. Like, I say it as, sometimes I just need to stop moving and stop thinking and stop looking for the terror and the joy. Sometimes I just need to be in this moment and allow myself to process and experiencing however I need to. In a bad way or a good way, there's no adjective to put in front of it. It's just, and it's hard for me too. But boy, I'll tell you, if I think any of us have learned anything this year, is that, it's a really good skill to have, just to know when to just stop and listen.
Yeah. I think that's really true. I think a lot of us, especially as overachieving types, had to come full frontal faced with the fact that a lot of our overachieving, constant movement, was hiding or not dealing with the stuff that we'd have to focus on if we stopped moving, even if we didn't know that stuff even existed. So all of a sudden I stopped moving and I was like, oh shit, there are demons around here. I didn't see them when I was running so fast and they couldn't catch me. And now they're everywhere and I'm swimming in them. So yeah, I hear that. Jill, I could talk to you all day. I wish that this was scheduled for 17 hours, but unfortunately it's only for an hour. So look, your talk is amazing. I want people to go watch it. We will absolutely put it in the show notes. The Unstoppable Power of Letting Go, and your book, Big Wild Love, The Unstoppable Power of Letting Go, also amazing. We'll also put a link to that in the show notes. But tell people who are listening and who are not watching this and seeing the scroll on the bottom, tell people where they can find you if they want to know more, if they want to check you out, if they want to hear from you how to let go of all the shit.
Yes. Oh, I always get so excited when people ask me that question. I'm like, yes. You can find me at letgoforit.com, or you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at letgoforit, and on LinkedIn at Jill Sherer Murray. And I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your story, or if you need help, or if I can help in any way around letting go. I mean, would be wonderful. I'm here for it. And this has been, I could talk to you too for 100,000 hours, throw in a pizza, and it's a big extra win.
I love it.
This is
Next
so
time.
great. I love talking with you. I love the whole idea of wonder hell, because I think so many of us, no matter how big or small the achievement, it's all relative, right? We can find ourselves in that space of wonder hell after finding our dream job, or like getting a great review, or, whatever it is. It's all relative, and it's going to be really helpful and really useful. So thank you for writing that. And I look forward to reading it.
I do too. I look forward to writing the first word. Thank you, Jill. You're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.